must not flirt with one's destiny.
Stop it! You're ignorant.
In terms of interpretations of Eyes Wide Shut, you mentioned various theories about the film. I thought that might be a good thing to start off on, because it kind of gets into some of the weirdness surrounding Stanley Kubrick. What interpretations are you most interested in, Sven, personally, about Eyes Wide Shut?
I hadn't thought of Eyes Wide Shut for quite some time, and then I saw the JRE appearance, of Quentin Tarantino and Roger Avery, and that was so out there and so crazy to me. And I had to think about that because um, that was the time when the Epstein scandal, was still making headlines. And I mean, even today as we speak, they released new files,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's pretty disturbing, some of it. I haven't really been digging through it at all, actually. I kind of think
yeah,
so many people are, looking into the Epstein thing,
right.
like Nick Bryant or other people like maybe yourself or Julie Brown. I don't know if she's still reporting on the Epstein thing, but Julie Brown from the Miami Herald. So I kind of just sort of leave it to them almost. It's also such a depressing story. There's been
Yes,
quite some
same
disturbing
here.
things, yeah,
Same
in
here.
this
And
film.
I mean, I always find it fascinating when Whitney Webb talks about it.
Yeah,
She's very good, I think. And she, I think she reminds us that this is not just about prostitution, or underage girls, but this is about much, much more. This is
yeah,
about
probably.
technology and
Mm,
weapons and our financial system, and so that's what I like about her. She doesn't, forget, the whole big picture behind that. Um, so that's great.
yeah.
And yeah, and you know, and it was interesting because on JRE, Tarantino didn't say anything about that. And it's so funny because when you look through the comments, you know, people go like, Tarantino's awfully quiet. What does he has to hide? What does he have to hide? Is he involved? Yeah, Avery, I think he was so out there because he was talking about, and I mean, this whole there's this whole internet theory about the missing 20 minutes of this film, right? And I don't even know where that comes from. Do you know where? Because I never found, the origin of this.
So, as you were saying that, I'm actually just trying to find the quote that came out recently by Roger Avery, where he elaborated a little bit on what he said on Joe Rogan's show. But before we get to that, I don't know originally where that whole 20 minutes removed rumor thing. I think really most people who have looked into it would be on the same page, being level headed about it, that like really that's kind of nonsense. I don't really think there were 20 minutes or anything like that removed from the film, and nothing of the sort of nature that some people can go on about, like, oh, there was a scene where there was a pentagram and they had to remove it. Like, I kind of don't know why you'd remove that from a film. I mean, it's sinister, but it's not like, it's not revealing someone specific or something like that, so that 20 minute or 25 minute, I think it is, that whole thing, I don't really buy that from what I've looked into. But in terms of, was there work done on Eyes Wide Shut after Kubrick's death that he did not sanction? That is very possible, and some people have dug into that. I've dug into it a bit myself, but not nearly as much as some people. But it really is a valid question, I think. In terms of Roger Avery, because Roger Avery was saying that the cut was edited. Is that right? I'm trying to remember. He was saying that the cut was edited without Kubrick's permission, or did he say something else?
Uh, yeah, that's what you said, and he was telling the story about a screening. I don't really remember, in London or somewhere, where behind the scenes he was like arguing with I don't know, with the producers, with the executives. I don't really know. You're not going to cut my film or something like that. It sounds too good to be true, you know. And he also claimed, and that was very interesting, he claimed to have a script from the set that was supposed to have a third person narration. And I mean, I once found like 20 minutes of a supposed script with a voice-over narration, but I don't think it's real. I think it's a fake. And I mean, when you look at Frederick Raphael's book, Eyes Wide Open, I think he mentioned something that he was thinking about something like that, but he never
Yeah.
mentioned that he actually did it.
I think Kubrick was thinking of having a voiceover. I don't know, was it recorded? I know Frederick Raphael, you're right. I think he did talk about that, and as you know yourself, but for those who don't know, Frederick Raphael being the co-screenwriter along with Stanley Kubrick on Eyes Wide Shut. In terms of Roger Avery, though, and what he was claiming, so this was only about a month or two ago, I think, in a publication called Vulture. Um, this was Lane Brown, who wrote for the New York Magazine's Vulture publication, and this was only about a month ago, where the journalist from the New York Magazine asked Roger Avery, "What's up with this? Can you tell us where you heard this about Kubrick having a fight with the editors, or, like a verbal argument with the editors?" And Roger Avery still stands by that claim. He said to the New York Magazine, their Vulture kind of sub publication is what's called, Vulture. I'm quoting from it. Avery says he heard the anecdote about the post screening fight from a William Morris agent who claimed to have been outside the screening room of the studio in England. He says it should be taken with a grain of salt, and that he, Avery, mentioned it on Joe Rogan's show only because the agent in question is now deceased. I don't know if you came across that quote, but that's what Roger Avery said a month ago when the New York Magazine followed up with him about what he said on Joe Rogan. So he's still sticking by that story, Roger Avery, and he's not saying it definitely happened. Like, he's saying, look, I heard it from a William Morris agent who's now dead. If the person's dead, it's obviously a bit more difficult you know, to corroborate, but makes you think. I will say that that anecdote, it was interesting when Roger Avery mentioned that anecdote a year or two ago, because was it a year or two ago he was on Joe Rogan?
Yeah, right.
Very recently, anyway.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not longer than a year ago, I think.
Yeah, because that claim about Kubrick having an argument with the editors and people being able to overhear it happening, that was alleged years ago. Years ago, like when I was a teenager. So this would have been in the early 2010s, probably around 2012, maybe 2014, 2013. I think it may have been Jay Widener, who's I don't know exactly what he does. I don't follow him much, but he was in the documentary Room 237 about The Shining. And people have different opinions of him, but it was either him or another researcher into, well, not really a researcher, he was kind of more like a blogger about conspiracies. I think his name was Kent, was his first name. I can't remember his last name. I think he might now be dead. Either Kent or Jay Widener told that exact same story that Roger Avery did. And that was back in like 2012, 2011, something like that. More than a year before Roger Avery said it on Joe Rogan. I do find that interesting. You know. So
Right. And I think if he really has a screenplay from the set, um, why not share it?
yeah.
With the Stanley Kubrick archives and with with all of us, so we can
Yeah.
judge for ourselves, because that would be, I mean, very interesting for historical reasons alone. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and the other thing he was saying, and this is where it gets juicy. He was mentioning, the toy store scene, the last scene,
Yeah.
where the daughter of Bill and Alice, Helena, is supposedly kidnapped by those two men, you
It
know.
looks like it. It sort of looks
Yeah.
like it's implying that at least, doesn't it?
Yeah, and he says they stole her for the quote unquote pedo cult. I
Did
mean, that's
Roger
it.
Avery do Roger
Yeah,
Avery's? Oh,
yeah,
okay.
he said that. He said that on JRE. Um, I mean, this is like,
I forgot about that bit. That's
yeah,
interesting.
this
So
is like some QAnon stuff,
yeah. Wa-
basically.
Was
And
he was that
I
in the
mean,
script? Was he saying that was in his script? That it made it
no,
explicitly
that
clear?
was his interpretation of
Ah.
the scene in the film.
Oh yeah, sure. I mean I think that's a reasonable interpretation.
I mean,
But
calling
yeah.
it pedo cult is, of course, I
Yeah.
mean,
So it's a little bit exaggerated perhaps. Or,
yeah, I mean, this is kind of, I think we get into murky waters when we just say something like that, because I think the conspiratorial implications of Eyes Wide Shut, they are not necessarily hidden. They're pretty much out there, I
yeah.
mean, in the film. And so when you say, they cut stuff and there's supposed to be more stuff or more explicit stuff, and this is like, I mean, this is kind of a vulgarization uh,
Yeah.
of the film, and I think the film is much more interesting than that and goes much more deeper than that. But still, I think it's an interesting thing to say that the daughter was kidnapped in the end, because those two men, we see them throughout the film, right?
We do see them early on in the film, in the party at Sidney Pollock's character's mansion. Now, that writer for the New York Magazine kind of, did some digging to see, well, is it really the two same actors, or are they just people who look similar? Um, it hasn't fully been established, was the impression that one would get from the New York Magazine. The journalist interviewed Kubrick's brother-in-law, Jan Harlan, from Germany, who was, I think, the executive producer or something on Eyes Wide Shut. And he wasn't able to sort of conclusively say that they weren't the same actors. He said they were from the same pool of extras, but he wasn't aware of whether it was the same pair of actors or not, if I remember correctly. If he did say it was not the same pair of actors, it still was very much open to interpretation about whether it was or wasn't. That was just maybe Jan Harlan's opinion, but he said he knew they were from the same pool of extras. Um, so yeah, I think they probably are the same two actors. Other people have looked into them and they seem to be the two same extras. Could just be a coincidence. We do see them quite early on in the film, from what it looks like, anyway. Um, Now, in terms of some of the things though that are kind of not too in the open in Eyes Wide Shut, even though some of the conspiratorial stuff is very much in the open in the film's plot. There are all these very subtle references to the occult in Eyes Wide Shut that are very subtle, and that's not quite so in the open. And as other people have mentioned, I'm sure the viewer watching this film, sometimes it can be like, depending on how much you're aware of it, it can be like watching the film with your eyes wide shut, or as wide open as they can be if you're kind of aware of some of the weird stuff that might be being referenced visually. There seem to be a lot of references to Freemasonry in the film, I don't know if you've looked into that, but there's some quite compelling evidence that Kubrick was, you know, I guess maybe looking at Freemason iconography to reference in some of his films. A Clockwork Orange being one where they're heavily put into the film from what it looks like, and Eyes Wide Shut being another. Some people think there are references to Scientology in the film, which I wasn't so sure of, but now my mind is a bit more open to it. Because when you read about what was happening in the background of the film in relation to Scientology, I don't know if you want to get into that, but it's a really weird story. Were you aware of what was happening with the Scientologists on the set of Eyes Wide Shut?
Yeah, right. I mean, there was this Tom Cruise's Scientology handler. He was on set all the time, and
Yeah,
Kubrick eventually gave him kind of a role or something. So he's in the
yeah.
movie because because he was there all the time.
Hmm.
And I know that people speculated about Nicole Kidman's character Alice having this dreaming of this naval officer, and some people claimed that that was like a Scientology uniform or something that he had, but I'm not sure about that. I mean, it's more Navy to me. Um,
Yeah, I think where people draw that inference from is because of the I think there's like some elite branch of Scientology called the Sea Org, and it's all designed after the Navy, where they're wearing these naval outfits like the one in the film. Um, it's possible. I mean, it would have been I think it would have been quite a Kubrick thing to do, if he was kind of putting a subtle little visual reference. I mean, that was, would have been I mean, Tom Cruise obviously at the time, uh, I think was a prominent Scientologist. Had he left the group and then came back or something? Oh, no, no, I'm getting mixed up. He was still in the
no.
group by then, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, he was brought in by his ex-wife Mimi Rogers,
Right.
who left eventually. I mean, like every one of his wives and girlfriends left Scientology eventually.
I read that Nicole Kidman used to be in Scientology in I think the late 80s or early 90s, so just before they started doing pre-production and production on Eyes Wide Shut. I don't know, is that true, but it was interesting. But during the filming of Eyes Wide Shut, there was a memoir written by a former Scientologist who kind of broke free from the group, and he said that during the filming of Eyes Wide Shut, the head of Scientology essentially sent goons over to England to keep an eye on Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman because they were worried that Tom Cruise was maybe going to leave the cult, that kind of thing. And it also sort of I think they tapped Nicole Kidman's phone or something while she was on the set of Eyes Wide Shut. That's what's claimed in the book anyway by this former Scientologist named Mike Rinder.
Ah,
Yeah,
he was big in the Sea Org, I think. He was
he
a
very
pretty
well may have been.
big guy in Scientology.
Yeah,
Right, right. Yeah. He's dead by now, I think. He died last year or 24.
yeah. The name of the book is A Billion Years: My Escape from a Life in the Highest Ranks of Scientology. So he probably was in the Sea Org. If I remember correctly, the Sea Org is like one of the top, whatever they have, levels or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And
yeah,
I mean, from Scientology's point of view, I think it's understandable because it was a very long shoot. It's still in the Guinness Book of World Records, for being the longest shoot.
I believe so.
I don't know, I have it in my notes. It was like 15 months, more than 15 months, the shoot alone. So, yeah, I understand that they got nervous because of that.
It's
And
very, very possible. Yeah. It seems to be a fairly reputable source. From what I can gather, I don't know. I have not read the book in full. I've read excerpts from it. There was a lot of intrigue happening on the set of Eyes Wide Shut. Um,
Yeah, and I
Catherine,
mean, you mentioned Scientology, and
yeah,
Kubrick's daughter was soon to become a Scientologist. And the thing is whether he already knew or didn't. And that's still disputed, right?
it's still disputed exactly. There was an article in the Daily Beast where someone who was a Scientologist, I think who was friends with Vivian Kubrick, claimed that Vivian became a Scientologist a year before they started filming Eyes Wide Shut. The family, the Kubrick family themselves, I think may disagree with that. They think it may have been after or something, but so it's disputed. Katharina Kubrick, who is Vivian's sister, um, she was, I think she was Stanley Kubrick's stepdaughter, and obviously she lived with Stanley for years. It was when Kubrick married his third wife, Christiana Kubrick, in the 1950s, and they remained married all the way to the end of his life in 1999. Katharina Kubrick and her dad were quite close, from what I can gather. And she's quite approachable. Like, she's online and stuff, and she'll answer people on Reddit or things. And she says she remembers that Scientology handler being on the set of Eyes Wide Shut. It's not some rumor. Like, Cruise's Scientology handler was there, as you pointed out. Um, so it's weird stuff. And yeah, there's also like let me see here. There's quite a bit here. Like Paul Thomas Anderson visited the set of Eyes Wide Shut. He was one of the few people allowed to visit the set, and this was when he had just released the film Boogie Nights. And Kubrick was very impressed by that film. And Paul Thomas Anderson later made The Master, which I think was something to do with Scientology. I have not seen it. I would like to see it. I've been meaning to for years, and so that was kind of like some people think meant to be about Scientology or something. Is that right?
Um, well, well, it's kind of a cop out, on Anderson's part because I mean, there were rumors it was about Scientology, and he tried to dispute that, because he was still friends with Tom Cruise, and he wanted to make one of those Mission Impossible movies. He wanted to be asked. He was a big fan of the franchise. He wanted to work with Tom Cruise. And the thing is that Tom Cruise got pretty mad because of the film. And he showed him the film, and they talked. And and after that, when journalists asked PTA about that, he wasn't very pleased. He didn't really want to talk about it. He said, Tom and I talked about this. It's okay, it's done. And it's not really about Scientology at all. And the thing is, having seen the film, the biography of this character, I think he's called Lancaster Dodd, played by Philip Seymour Hoffman. It's I do think it's very much inspired by L. Ron Hubbard,
Sure. Yeah.
but it's not really a film about Scientology. It's more a film about this relationship that he has with Joaquin Phoenix's character. And I mean, I guess it's a good film, but I mean, either you're inspired by L. Ron Hubbard or you are not. And I don't know, trying to have it both ways, being inspired by Scientology and at the same time still trying to be friends with Tom Cruise. I mean, for me, that's kind of a opportunist take, and I don't really like that. And I didn't like PTA's last film.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I did an episode about that, and I will make a second episode about the film because I really hated it, and Yeah, but this is a very interesting connection, and I didn't know that PTA visited the set actually.
Yeah, and something interesting that Recluse from the Farm podcast pointed out to me was that the film that PTA had just put out there that Kubrick was so impressed by before he visited the set of Eyes Wide Shut, Boogie Nights, it was a fictionalized version of, let me see here, or yeah, it's a fictionalized version of I think like an LAPD informant or something and murders that happened. I have not seen Boogie Nights. It's another film I need to see.
Oh, it's a
Um,
story about, the porn actor John Holmes.
right, yeah, John Holmes. Recluse was filling me in on some of this info because I didn't know about it and it was very interesting. The porn actor John Holmes. Kubrick apparently researched, stories like that when he was making Eyes Wide Shut and probably beforehand as well. He was always interested in making Eyes Wide Shut since like the late 60s or mid 60s, so, it was a constant thing. But this thing, you see, John Holmes, um, there was some very interesting things to do with that and the Al-Fayed connection to Eyes Wide Shut. One of the people who was involved with John Holmes, or maybe involved in the investigation of murders or something that Holmes may have been involved with or something, ended up writing screenplays during the time of Eyes Wide Shut himself in Hollywood. And Dodi Al-Fayed, so Mohamed Al-Fayed's son, who died in the Princess Diana crash in 1997 in Paris, Dodi Al-Fayed employed this particular ex-cop. He employed him as a bodyguard.
Right.
This is when Boogie Nights was being
He
made.
wrote
Yeah.
this film with Josh Hartnett and Harrison Ford. Um, it was called Hollywood Homicide. Robert Souza. You mean Robert Souza?
Yeah, that's the one. That's the one. And this was all when Boogie Nights was being made and when PTA visited the set of Eyes Wide Shut. And Dodi Al-Fayed apparently hired Souza as a bodyguard, which was interesting. And Souza was in the Writers Guild and handled money accounts, including for Dodi Al-Fayed, I think. And where this comes into play with Eyes Wide Shut is because, as I said to Recluse on his show a while ago, um, Mohamed Al-Fayed was scared that he was going to be exposed in Eyes Wide Shut, which was fascinating. Tony Zierra was the one who kind of first revealed that in his documentary about the making of Eyes Wide Shut. Tony Zierra's film is called SK13. It's now back online, so people can rent it or watch it. It's a great movie.
Oh, is it
Um,
back? Is it back? Because
yeah,
I've
it's
been
back.
meaning to
Yeah,
watch it, but it
yeah.
wasn't available.
It got taken down because they were going to try and they premiered it somewhere in New York, and now they put it back on the web for people to rent or buy. Um, so I asked Tony Zierra, could he elaborate, and he elaborated that a friend of the Kubrick family was someone who may have been, abused by Mohamed Al-Fayed. May have been someone working at his department store, Harrods, I think. May have been someone working for him potentially. I'm not sure what exactly her position was, but she may have been quoted in an article making allegations about him, I think, was Tony Zierra's recollection. And so, because this person was reportedly a friend of the Kubrick family behind the scenes, Muhammad Ali on him in Eyes Wide Shut, because the rumors were going around that this film being made, Eyes Wide Shut, is a kind of sordid story with sex scandals and all these kind of things. So Muhammad Al-Fayed being paranoid and, you know, always worried about his image and kind of obsessive about his image, got worried about this. And Tony Zierra put forth that that was probably why Mohamed Al-Fayed ran that thing on Kubrick shortly before his death. Mohamed Al-Fayed took over, founded, no, not founded, took over Punch magazine and ran an article about Kubrick saying that basically he was a nutcase, he's just, weird man who, all this kind of defamatory stuff, and it was to try and smear Kubrick before Eyes Wide Shut came out, is Tony Zierra's idea. And Kubrick took the unusual step for him, because he didn't usually do this, of suing Punch magazine. And he said that it was because he did not want his family remembering him as some crazy old man. He didn't want this kind of defamatory content being out there and unchallenged and everything. Kubrick was going to testify probably in court in this case. He died before he could testify. And so, that case, the court section of that case anyways, it never happened. So Mohamed Al-Fayed's connections to this film and the film industry run quite deep. And that's even without the weirder, more speculative stuff. During the time that Princess Diana died, maybe about a month or two after she died, less than 3 months anyway, there was a break-in on the set of Eyes Wide Shut. 2 of the actors' trailers were broken into. I got that info from a document I found in the Kubrick archive in London. I inferred that it may have been Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise's trailers, but I've no idea. I just inferred, 2 of the actors' trailers, but it could have been any actors really from the film. So that was very, very shortly after Princess Diana and Dodi Al-Fayed died, and Mohamed Al-Fayed was paranoid that there was going to be stuff about him in this film, apparently, in Eyes Wide Shut.
You mentioned Harrods,
Yeah.
The famous department store, and
Yeah.
is it true that the toy store and the toy store scene was designed after the toy store in Harrods?
Tony Zierra told me that it was, and he puts it in his film actually in SK13, putting them side by side, kind of to show how they looked identical. And so he seemed to indicate it was. I thought it was too. I still think it very well could have been. Someone, I think, wrote a comment on, I think it was on Recluse's episode of The Farm, where this commenter said that it was actually the exact same way another toy store was designed in another department store in New York. So I'm not entirely sure. But I mean, it was definitely an interesting connection. Mohamed Al-Fayed ended up sort of trying to bring Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman into his fold after Eyes Wide Shut came out. Tony Zierra said that was because Al-Fayed was, just trying to bring them into his fold after being in Eyes Wide Shut.
Did they know? Did they know Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman? Did they know Dodi and Diana?
Dodi Al-Fayed had the same publicist that Tom Cruise had, a woman named Pat Kingsley. So it's possible they knew each other. They were at Princess Diana's funeral, as were many celebrities. But I thought the fact that Tom Cruise's publicist was the same as Dodi Al-Fayed's was very interesting. Recluse found it interesting as well. Dodi Al-Fayed, was in the film business. He helped finance, I think, the film Chariots of Fire, that kind of thing. So it's definitely possible. I'm not aware of any direct relationship between them and Dodi Al-Fayed, but it's very possible. And Pat Kingsley, I mean, she was the one who turned up for some sort of extra screening of the film before it was released. Tony Zierra implied that was because Pat Kingsley and Tom Cruise may have been concerned about Eyes Wide Shut. They wanted to see it again because they were maybe concerned. I don't know. Emilio D'Alessandro, Kubrick's personal assistant for decades, I think wrote in his autobiography, and he said the same thing to me when I met him, that Kubrick seemed happy about what Pat Kingsley thought of the film. But Tony Zierra's documentary indicates otherwise. So, and I'm not saying that either of them are wrong. I think that more has come out in the years that have kind of maybe made the possibility of what is in SK13 maybe more likely. But who knows? Maybe there are different sources sometimes. So it's difficult for people like Emilio or Tony Zierra or myself to know exactly. But so it'd be interesting to see what happened. So yeah, so it's that's a long way of saying through Pat Kingsley, Tom Cruise could have known Dodi Al-Fayed easily. Yeah, very possibly.
Yeah, let's talk about Emilio D'Alessandro, who was Kubrick's longtime assistant and driver. You actually you paid him a visit in Italy. Is that right? Just talk about this. How did that come about?
Well, it was a very nice visit. It was a very nice trip. I happened to be near where Emilio D'Alessandro lives, and I was seeing some friends in Rome, and I thought to myself, why don't I get the train down? I'll try contacting Emilio D'Alessandro. I think it was through an Italian Facebook fan page for Stanley Kubrick. And I think the person who ran the page is a friend of Emilio's. And I messaged this page, not really thinking anything would happen, just mentioning I would happen to be in the area soon. Would Emilio be willing to talk to me? Because I was, writing for my blog, Commendable Commotion, about Eyes Wide Shut in this particular article for the blog. And surprisingly, the owner of the page got back to me, Emilio's longtime friend, and I think caregiver maybe as well. And he said, "Yeah, sure, I can contact Emilio," and actually got back to me then soon, saying Emilio's willing to talk to you. Let us know when you're in the area, and be best if you came down to Casino to meet him would be the best option for them, would be most convenient. So I said, sure, and Casino is a lovely town in central Italy. There's, as you'll know if you've read Emilio's biography or his autobiography, there's a big like monastery at the top of a mountain overlooking the town. And there was a lot of fighting that went on in World War II, bombings and stuff. And there's a monument to that in the town. It's a beautiful town, and I went there and met up with Paolo, who was Emilio's friend and caregiver, and we went to see Emilio, and I asked him some of the stuff about the intrigues surrounding Eyes Wide Shut, and it was a very interesting conversation. One of the things Emilio told me was that very shortly after, and I didn't even put two and two together when he told me this, that very shortly after Princess Diana died, there was a white car following Emilio over and over again during the making of Eyes Wide Shut. And Emilio was concerned about this. It kept happening. He didn't know, was it a journalist who was interested in what was happening and being kind of overly inquisitive, like kind of harassing, really. This was full on, like this person was following Emilio everywhere, chasing him down the motorway on one occasion, which, and Emilio looked back when he was driving on the motorway and saw the guy in this white Fiat Uno, I think it was, on the phone, like reporting to someone while he was driving after Emilio. Crazy stuff. Crazy. And Emilio was concerned. He talked to Stanley Kubrick about this, and Kubrick eventually was like, he was initially kind of like, oh, well, how do you know you're being followed, Emilio? I mean, and Emilio D'Alessandro said, well, I mean, because, I mean, they're making it so bloody obvious, you know what I mean? It's clear that I mean, when this person is closer each morning when you arrive on the set, and this person's sitting there in the Fiat Uno, and then chases you down a motorway and is driving around following you, and then Kubrick eventually, I think Emilio said Kubrick eventually was like, yeah, you're probably being followed, you're right, so this would have been in October of 1997. This was around the time, as I said, Mohamed Al-Fayed was very worried apparently about what was going to be in the film. His son and would-be daughter-in-law, probably, Princess Diana, both died in Paris in that car crash. I didn't know when Emilio told me about the white Fiat Uno following him that a white Fiat Uno was apparently a big part of the Diana story, that there was a white Fiat Uno at the scene of the crash that may have been involved in the crash. I didn't know that. I had not really looked into the Diana death. I still haven't. Recluse from the Farm podcast was the one who pointed that out to me, and I was like, whoa, so that kind of blew my mind, but I don't know. So yeah, and the other thing was, yeah, so that was October 1997. That was when the break-in happened as well on the set of Eyes Wide Shut. A break-in. I don't know, has the person ever been found? I think Emilio may have told me the person was found, but Emilio told me that he had no idea. I remember now, he told me he never found out who it was. He was never told who it was. Just that they caught the guy and that was it. So,
Did you ask him what he makes of all this, Eyes Wide Shut controversy and w whether there's a conspiracy at all, and what the conspiracy actually is? Because I think that's that's the real question. I mean, is the film Stanley Kubrick's final cut and everything is fine, or is that the real cover-up that they had to change stuff? I mean, for the rating and for technical reasons. I know that they changed part of the soundtrack because of because there were some protests, um, stuff like that. And so, I mean, was it like a PR thing, to say this is Stanley Kubrick's vision, this is what he intended? Because there was a lot of stuff that they had to change. I mean, those CGI cutouts, in the orgy scene to avoid the NC-17 rating, for example, the changes in the soundtrack, and other people like Roger Avery allege that there was a voiceover narration. Um, we don't have any real evidence for that, but it was alleged. So, I mean, did Emilio say something about that being Final Cut or not? And did you know about Al-Fayed?
um, I asked Emilio about Mohamed Al-Fayed because of what Tony Zierra had put in his documentary. Emilio didn't remember anything particularly about Al-Fayed. I think he remembered Kubrick saying that Kubrick thought Al-Fayed was trying to get, I think, a British citizenship or something at the time, and Emilio, I think, mentioned that Kubrick, in passing in conversation, said he thought that Al-Fayed should get it. That was all Emilio remembered regarding Mohamed Al-Fayed. In terms of the film's state of completion, so I won't be able to comment on that. I will say that there was one person from the making of Eyes Wide Shut who told me that a foreign language dubber for Eyes Wide Shut, when it was being released internationally, who was a very, very experienced foreign language dubber, named Mario Maldesi, was very, very angry at stuff that was allegedly being done to Eyes Wide Shut after Kubrick's death. And this dubber, who had worked, I think, on other Kubrick films in the past for their international releases, if I'm not mistaken, this man Mario Maldesi was very angry at Eyes Wide Shut. The implication was, and again, I can't say who told me this. It was someone from the film, but the implication was that there may have been some stuff. So that Mario Maldesi just walked out of the editing room. He was furious. He thought that there was stuff being done to the film he did not agree with. I'm not sure about the specifics of that, but that was one anecdote I heard. Frederick Raphael said in a video interview several years ago, I think it was for a documentary that someone did. Frederick Raphael said that Sidney Pollock helped edit Eyes Wide Shut after Kubrick died. Sidney Pollock playing the kind of the antagonist in some ways in the film. Um, I don't know. It's certainly interesting. If you watch SK13 by Tony Zierra, he very much has quite a bit of testimony and evidence that the film probably may have been, um, you know, some people may have had their hands on the film after Kubrick's death without Kubrick sanctioning it. Is what SK13 indicates, and including some Warner Brothers executives indicated that to some extent. That was why the Pat Kingsley screening happened. Was there was some concern about the film, for Tom Cruise particularly, I think may have been, and a Warner Brothers executive is talking about this screening and tells Tony Zierra to go off camera. He's like, no, I can't say it. Let's turn off the camera, and things like that. Very interesting things that indicate there may have been concerns about the film that maybe some people might have wanted to deal with after Kubrick's death. But again, nothing like those kind of rumors that came out later about 25 minutes being cut and 25 minutes of a satanic ritual or something. We see a satanic ritual in the film, Like, I mean, it's like, I don't know why they remove a pentagram or something, or 25 minutes. Like, I don't know where that came from. It's just, I think that's honestly just kind of, in the ether of internet forums, someone just spun that up, kind of. And there's a grain of truth, I think, from what you see in SK13, and from what I was told by someone involved in the film about Mario Maldesi, the dubbing editor, walking out of the room because he was so disgusted with what was being done to the film after Kubrick's death. Beyond that, I'd have to look at my notes more and get some more, if there's any more info about that. I'm not sure, but Tony Zierra would be the guy to ask about that, and people can watch his film SK13 as well and see for themselves the evidence. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think all this um, all this evidence that we have now that we know and all those accounts, I think they just show us that you know what they all said, the filmmakers, the producers back in the day, wasn't entirely true. That the film was actually, finished in time by Kubrick. It probably wasn't finished in time. And I mean, and of course that's very problematic because how do you finish a Kubrick film, right?
Yeah.
So who's the who's going to be the authority on that? I mean, it's you have Jan Harlan, but you have Leon Vitali, who may have some say over the matter. Apparently, you have Sidney Pollack. Um, you have the Warner Brothers executives, and maybe you even have Ted Turner, who was a big stockholder, back in the day. I mean, the story goes that he fired those two Warner Brothers executives because the film was too long or something, I don't know, and he didn't really get it or something. And Ted Turner wasn't really known to be a cinephile. I mean, he
Yeah.
tried to colorize Casablanca, back in the day when he was still a network kind of guy. And so, yeah, I mean, who's able to finish a Stanley Kubrick film but Kubrick himself? There was an interview with Nigel Galt, the editor of the film, and I mean a recent interview that he gave for the new Criterion release of the film.
Yeah.
And in his opinion, the film was Stanley Kubrick's vision completely, and that's what he said.
That's what Nigel Galt said. Yeah, there's definitely a contrast between what some people involved in the film and what some other people who knew Kubrick and that kind of thing, and who worked on the film themselves in some cases. There's definitely a contrast between what's claimed. There was an anecdote that someone mentioned. I'm trying to get it here. It was a very interesting anecdote. A film director allegedly was making a film. The film was called Accelerator, and it was being filmed at Elstree Studios, where Eyes Wide Shut was being filmed and edited, apparently, according to this story I heard. And a friend of this filmmaker um, was at Elstree Studios a lot during that time, working on this other film called Accelerator. And this friend allegedly heard stories from the crew of Accelerator that Eyes Wide Shut's editing process was very much unfinished. Very much unfinished, despite the press making it sound like it was finished. So I don't know. That's just an anecdote, secondhand, from someone who says he was friends with this guy at Elstree Studios. The guy himself who said this story is a filmmaker himself, actually based here in Ireland, as far as I know. So I might reach out to him sometime, see if he's anything to say. So I don't know. There's definitely a lot of intrigue surrounding the state of completion of Eyes Wide Shut and contrasting viewpoints on it, that kind of thing. Jan Harlan, Kubrick's brother-in-law, the producer of Eyes Wide Shut, he's, as you probably know yourself, he's definite that it was Kubrick's final cut and all that kind of thing. So there's a big contrast. Nigel Galt, as you know, the editor, he said the same thing. Frederick Raphael did not. The source I talked to, not Emilio D'Alessandro, the source I talked to, who I can't name, but who knew Kubrick very, very well, he did not think it was finished at all. There was even some thoughts that this person gave me that he thought Steven Spielberg may have been involved in the editing to some extent. I can't quite remember, but I remember that was something that came up, that he thought that was a distinct possibility. So yeah, there's a lot of intrigue surrounding that. There's also quite a lot of intrigue surrounding Tony Zierra's recent documentary about Eyes Wide Shut, SK13. We can get into that if you like, but in terms of Eyes Wide Shut itself, there's already so much intrigue there, as you know.
Yeah, sure. I've been meaning to ask you about the film because you were one of the first people who mentioned the film, and I didn't know anything about the film, and I was very interested when I heard about it. So and now I've heard that it can be watched again, which is great,
Yeah.
which I definitely would do. And yeah, tell me, I mean, what kind of film is that? Is it like a Room 237 but for Eyes Wide Shut, or is it what is it exactly?
It's basically about the making of Eyes Wide Shut and about the intrigue surrounding what was going on behind the scenes during the production and post production. It's not like Room 237, no, it's not like a collage of different theories about what the film was about or anything. Tony Zierra does give his interpretation of what the film was symbolically kind of about, and it's quite a good interpretation. And people can go and find it in the film. It's definitely one of the more believable interpretations of the film. But most of it is about, was this film really Kubrick's intended cut, or was there some meddling going on, or that kind of thing? And he comes up with some very compelling evidence that there may have been. And it's interesting because, like, I mean, one of the initial music composers for SK13, just as a complete unrelated point, but very weird unrelated point, the initial music composer for SK13 died during the production. Tony Zierra said that him and his crew, I think that this composer was murdered. Unrelated to the stuff talked about in SK13, just for different potential reasons. Tony Zierra's mother, sadly, was attacked during the post production of Eyes Wide Shut. Or, sorry, not of Eyes Wide Shut, of SK13. Again, just random, very unfortunate, traumatic event. But still just a bad coincidence, as it were. They had a difficult production, to be honest with you. They were going to They were going to premiere it at the Cannes Film Festival. Cannes Film Festival after Film Worker came out. You know, that documentary about Leon Vitali, so Stanley's other assistant. Cannes Film Festival premiered that. They loved it, and they said to Tony Zierra, "We will screen your next film when it's out. Just let us know when it's ready." Tony Zierra was done with it, sent it to Cannes Film Festival, and they just said, "Yeah, no, I basically they just walked away from it. They just walked away. They couldn't show it. They just indicated that they just would not and could not show it. You know, so yeah, they had a tricky production, and there was a lot of intrigue in the production itself. Um, you know, some of it quite tragic, some of it quite traumatic, like as I said, you know, but unrelated in many cases to the film itself. But the Cannes Film Festival thing, that was directly related to the film and maybe the content in the film. So
What
yeah,
were their objections? I mean, of the Cannes Film Festival. What do you think, or did Tony tell you?
Tony Zierra said this in an interview Tony did with people who were waiting for the film to come out. It was a couple of years ago or something like that. About that Cannes Film Festival controversy. I can't remember what the reason was. I think Tony's suspicions were that, you know, the Cannes Film Festival didn't want to, you know, um, ruffle any feathers, you know. Um, Maybe if Tom Cruise, maybe. I'm kind of going off memory. You'd have to ask Tony himself, or maybe have a look at the interview he did. I think the name of the channel the interview's on, it's his production company. It's called Doc Addicts, as in like documentary addicts. It's one of the early videos there. It's an interview. So you know, your listeners can listen to that and it'll be kind of helpful, and they can watch the film itself. It'll be helpful too. So yeah, yeah, both quite a bit of intrigue for both SK13 and the film it's about, Eyes Wide Shut.
There's another interesting thing going on in Eyes Wide Shut. Um, I don't know if you have this,
I do.
and
I have
and you,
the massive one actually from
you have
years
the
ago.
massive one. Oh, that's great.
Yeah,
Um,
it's pretty good actually.
because here's this interesting little fictitious article.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, by Larry Salona.
Right. This article by Larry Salona, who who was a journalist for the New York Post, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, he was an advisor on the film,
Yeah.
and the story goes that he was one of the first people who broke the death of Jeffrey Epstein.
He was, yeah.
Yeah, so that's very interesting because this article, this fictitious article, is about the death of a fashion model, which is supposed to be the girl overdosing in Victor Ziegler's home at
Yeah.
the Christmas party. She's the one who supposedly saved Tom Cruise at the orgy, where she sacrificed herself instead of him, and then she died. And this article just, I mean, it just opened up this whole world of, you know, fashion and elite prostitution rings. And And as we talked about before, some new Epstein files came out today, and I mean, this is exactly the thing that he dealt with and dealt in. And when you think of people like John Casablancas, who used to run those, pageants, and you know, uh, or even Donald Trump, and his own uh, teen pageants, what have you. So there's this connection, and I mean, I'm not saying that Stanley Kubrick knew about Jeffrey Epstein, but he certainly knew about these practices because he was interested in adapting Arthur Schnitzler's novella, Traumnovelle, um, since the early 60s, I think.
Yeah,
Um,
I think so,
and
yeah.
I mean, that was the time of the Profumo affair in Great Britain. I think it was 62 or 63. So he was aware of that, and maybe he made the connection even back then, because it was kind of the same thing, an elite prostitution ring, and many important people involved, politicians mostly, and this kind of thing just I mean, history repeats itself, and those things they never went away. And maybe that's one of the things that makes Eyes Wide Shut so interesting, at least to me. What do you think?
There are loads of thematic parallels because I think a very fair interpretation of Eyes Wide Shut is that, like, it clearly is concerned with elite deviance, as it were, and the dark underbelly of sort of supposedly respectable high society. I think that's a fair interpretation. I think most people these days would agree. Back in the day when the film came out, it seemed most people weren't saying that as much. Most people were focusing on the kind of, oh, it's about jealousy and betrayal, which it clearly kind of is as well, There's so many different things the film is about, as it were. In terms of Epstein, like, yeah, I mean, obviously, some people would say, oh, did it predict the Jeffrey Epstein scandal, or did Kubrick know something about Jeffrey Epstein? I have no idea, but I don't think there's much evidence for that at all. I think he very well could have known people like Jeffrey Epstein. Kubrick ran in these circles of, like, socially, like, he had friends and acquaintances who were very high up in British political circles. He also worked with people to some degree from, like, organizations like NASA and all this kind of thing for 2001, particularly that film. Um, he was tuned into the elite of Hollywood, even though he lived over in the south of England. He still was very much on friendly terms with very high up film directors who, you know, not connected to Epstein, but just these were the social circles Kubrick was in. And the only connection that I was able to find to think about Epstein specifically was that I think the mansion that was used for the satanic orgy scene, the exterior, I think, Elvedon Estate, um, is owned by the Ivy family, a very rich dynasty, and the Earl of Ivy's wife was in Epstein's plane like more than 30 times. Um, so, but I don't know if she married into the Ivy family before, during, or after Eyes Wide Shut. I don't know, was Kubrick aware of that connection at all? It seems like a bit of a stretch to me, but it's certainly an ironic kind of parallel, on a more literal level.
Yeah, right. And if we talk about the last scene again, with the daughter, and having been abducted or not. I mean, if she isn't, it certainly looks like that anyway.
Oh yeah.
And it's interesting because I don't know if you know Simon Dovey, the Hotstar, on Twitter. He wrote this book, Eye of the Chicken Hawk.
I've heard of that. I'm a bit too afraid to read it, but I've heard of that book. Yeah, it's very grim, isn't it? It's about
Yeah,
different
it's
child
very
abuse
grim.
networks and things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely. It's very grim, um, but it's very good. And he, on his website, he wrote about Eyes Wide Shut, and
Really?
yeah, and there were some interesting things that he hinted upon, and
Okay.
I will
Like,
just read to you what he had to say about the toy store scene. Bill and Alice's daughter is named Helena. Helen of Troy was abducted by Paris of Troy as a preteen. So that is it's quite interesting. I mean, the fact that Kubrick named the daughter Helena, I mean, as an allusion to this old myth, you know, which
possibly.
I mean might be quite a stretch, but I think it's interesting and the
Oh
way
yeah,
Kubrick
sure.
operates,
I
you know.
do yeah, I wouldn't say it's a huge stretch. I think it very well could be a reference. I know that reference has been some people have noted that before. Simon Doe what's his name? Simon Doby?
Dovey or
Dovey.
Dovey, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce this name.
He may have
Dovey.
yeah, he may have been the first to note that possible reference. A lot of people have noted that, so it's interesting. It's a very. I don't think it's too much of a stretch. It is kind of as you said how Kubrick kind of operated, isn't it? Like what else did Simon Dovey say? I'm curious. I'm going to read this article because I didn't know that he wrote about Eyes Wide Shut specifically.
Yeah, he wrote about uh, the Epstein connection in general. He was writing about all this messing with the film in the post-production. He was writing about Larry Salona's article, um, and he was mentioning, when he was writing about Larry Salona, um, given the context of Mandy's death, the article suggests fashion models and pageant contestants are prime recruits for high-class prostitution rings, and that from these industries, such as London fashion designer Leon Vitali, facilitate this. London fashion designer Leon Vitali is a quote from Larry Salona's fictional article.
Yeah,
He further writes, it turned out a modeling agency financed by Jeffrey Epstein was being used by Jean-Luc Brunel for exactly this purpose. Furthermore, in March 1993, Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump had traveled to Palm Beach with a passenger named Erin Nance. This was Miss Georgia in 1993 and runner-up Miss USA that same year. Erin Nance soon went on to marry Albert Hill III, an heir to the multi-billion-dollar H.L. Hunt oil fortune in Dallas. Epstein appears to have remained in close contact with her, as the private numbers he lists for her are vast. So, this is one example of the things that he writes about, and he writes about the mansion used. You mentioned Alveden Hall, and for the exterior shots of Somerton Mansion, Kubrick used the facade of Mentmore Towers, an old uh, Rothschild estate or Rothschild estate, where
yeah,
Marie
that was
Helene de Rothschild hosted an infamous masked ball in 1972.
Yeah, that was one of the other estates used. Elvedon may have been, maybe I'm wrong, maybe it was the interior that Elvedon was used for, but
Yes, that's right.
Mentmore, okay, right, I got mixed up then, yeah. So Mentmore was the exterior, right? Yeah,
Right.
yeah. And that was the Rothschild mansion where the masked ball happened in the 1970s, which there are photos flying around. So it's a really weird masked ball that happened there in the 70s. And one of the attendees of that masked ball was Marisa Berenson, who was one of the main characters in Barry Lyndon, which Stanley Kubrick filmed in 1974, something like that. And that's a whole nother story about the weird stuff that happened there, where he had to flee, because of threats apparently from the IRA, but it's still unclear why were they threatened, you know? Recluse goes into that in his book. The what's it called? The Minotaur, a Kubrick Odyssey, is Recluse's book. Stephen Snider is his real name.
Right.
Uh, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, shout out to Steven Snider because this is a fascinating book. And
Yeah, it's really
I
good.
mean, if you're I you don't have to be interested in I don't know in conspiracies or something like that to appreciate this book because I think it's got a wealth of useful information and just interesting connections throughout, and it's very credible and also very skeptical where it should be, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Like I mean, he really is very and quite rightly dismissive of some of the stupid ideas that have gone around, like oh, Kubrick faked the moon landing, all that kind of thing. Like it's kind of it's almost like a it's almost like how can you take anything seriously about Kubrick if you're going to be running around with that idea in your head, so he kind of points out that like that's silly and like that's just not, it doesn't hold up to evidence at all. And then there's the other intriguing things around Kubrick's background that are very intriguing. Some of it, I didn't really know if I agreed with that it was a sign of anything particularly sinister. And then some stuff I was like, oh, okay, no, I can see where that fits in with, Kubrick's references to the occult in A Clockwork Orange or in Eyes Wide Shut as well, obviously. Um, I mean, in his book, just given that it's relevant to Eyes Wide Shut, he talks about a man in Hollywood who hosted parties and Kubrick attended them, I think in the 50s or something. And this was like, there were occult people who would come to those. Like there was one guy at least who was like a witch or something. This was the circle Kubrick was in, and I always wondered why does he seem so preoccupied with Freemasonry and the occult and that kind of thing, and putting references. I mean, he never publicly talked about it, but there's some very credible evidence he was referencing those sort of secret societies in some of his films. Eyes Wide Shut being the most obvious. And when reading Recluse's book, it kind of made sense that okay, so I my suspicion was right. He was friends with people in Hollywood who were part of circles like that, and it must have left an impression on him, for good or bad.
I think so too. And I also liked his theory why Kubrick left the US for England. You know, the desire to protect his daughters from the Hollywood lifestyle, and his experience with Jack Harris, um, who might have had an affair with Sue Lyon, with an underage Sue Lyon, and I don't know if he mentioned that, but other people mentioned it. The Kirk Douglas controversy. Him having allegedly, you know, uh, abused Natalie Wood.
Yes, I came across that rumor, maybe in Recluse's book.
Yeah,
Um,
and I mean, the interesting thing in the Lolita film, in the first scene, the first thing that is getting mentioned is Peter Sellers talking about Spartacus,
oh yeah, yeah,
and
exactly. Yeah,
I mean, make of that what you will, but it's interesting.
it's interesting, and in terms of Peter Sellers, like I mean, he hung around with the Sharon Tate, Roman Polanski kind of gang of people who some of whom ended up being killed in the Manson murders.
And not only that, he knew Stephen Ward, who was the supposed, pimp in the Profumo affair.
Peter Sellers, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And the Peter Sellers, of course, was a Freemason. And I'm not saying that about any sort of like, oh, Freemasons are all bad or anything. I'm just saying that if Kubrick keeps putting these apparent references to Freemasonry visually in some of his films like Clockwork Orange and Eyes Wide Shut, he was on very friendly terms with Peter Sellers, who was a very um what's the word? I don't know how, if he was a high ranking Freemason, but he was very well known Freemason. Peter Sellers was. He was in the Chelsea Grand Lodge, I think it's called, in London. Um, Peter Sellers, got quite into the occult. There's a book that was written about him called The Life and Death of Peter Sellers, and there was quite a good film adapted from it, made for the BBC. And Stephen Fry plays this like scam kind of occult person, like the scam artist guy who Peter Sellers becomes obsessed with because he's just desperately looking for meaning basically in his life. And he's all kind of like, Stephen Fry's like, oh, you will, the sky is blue today. That means you will meet the person who will become your, silly things like that, but all kind of into the occult. And it's depicted very kind of humorously in that film, but very tragically as well. So that was Peter Sellers, and again, that was also someone Kubrick was friendly with for years, apparently. Who he was the main actor, as you know, in Doctor Strangelove and in Lolita. So yeah, and he was a Freemason. So I don't know. I asked Katharina Kubrick, Kubrick's daughter, if she was aware of Kubrick researching Freemasonry for his films, and particularly for Eyes Wide Shut. She said that she would not be surprised at all if he did, because he almost certainly would have done that for his research in Eyes Wide Shut. One of the books Kubrick used for researching Eyes Wide Shut was called Cult and Occult. And there are, I think, some passages about Freemasonry in that book. And this was a book Kubrick had in his possession. But there are other occult kind of ideas that Kubrick may have been inspired by. The Golden Bough being one that kind of references some of those occult ideas. And The Golden Bough was a book that Kubrick loved, and he sent it, I think, to a Warner Brothers executive saying, you should read this and all this kind of thing. And the executive was like, why? And he was like, because it'll change your life. And I can't remember what the exact quote was, but he loved it. Recluse talks about that in his book. He'd be the guy to ask about that.
For me, the one of the most obvious hints that Eyes Wide Shut is about, as you said, elite deviancy, is the fact that Eyes Wide Shut is a pretty accurate adaptation of the Schnitzler novella,
Yeah,
but there's one thing that Kubrick added, and that is the Victor Ziegler character played by Sidney
exactly.
Pollack. And this whole, without Ziegler, there'd be no conspiracy at all. So I think he's kind of he's kind of an Epstein figure
Yeah,
himself, I think. Um, so for me, that is a big sign, that this is what he was getting at, and that he knew about the Profumo affair. And my theory is that he wanted to make kind of a Dr. Strangelove type film about it, because he wanted to make it with one time with Woody Allen, one time with Steve Martin,
yeah,
and make kind of a sex comedy about it. But it kind of evolved and became this whole other thing. And yeah,
yeah.
so of course it's a film about jealousy and about relationships, but I think you can't just ignore the whole Ziegler complex at all.
Yeah, yeah, that's what makes it such a good film in my view. Is because there are just all these different layers to it. Like it is a very, I think, quite moving film about relationships and this kind of thing. And I don't find Stanley Kubrick's films very moving. They are good in many ways, but excuse me, but they are quite methodical, and so is Eyes Wide Shut. But really, the some of the stuff in Eyes Wide Shut I think is incredibly emotional, and it's quite surprising in a way that it's a Kubrick film. I don't want to sound like I'm being mean to him, but I mean, really, like, he's not considered a very emotional filmmaker. I'm sure he was as a person in many ways, even though he was quite soft spoken. But in terms of his films, like this one is really, people say Barry Lyndon is his most emotional film. I disagree, but depends Depends on what gets people feeling things, I suppose.
Yeah, Matthew, this has been a blast. I thank you very much for coming on the show. You talk to me about this. Please tell the listeners where they can find your work, and I will link to it, of course, in the description.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, very interesting conversation. You can find me at Commendable Commotion, which is on Substack, and it's also on YouTube. And I'm on Twitter as well, or X, Commendable Commotion. And you can find me there. You can find my stuff there. Got some good stuff coming out. And there's a movie there as well, which people can watch. So yeah, that's where they can find me.
This was Matthew Tannam-Elgie. Thank you very much for coming on.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you.
I haven't seen you in church lately.
One must not flirt with one's destiny.